Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining me. Ooh, I really need to be better organized. Anyway, yes, thanks for joining me again this evening. As always, I put it out there, and there were some questions came up, and I was asking for ideas, topics. There were a lot of different questions. Again, when I was looking at them, what I was noticing. I'm not saying this is the case. This is just the way my mind works. What I noticed about a lot of the questions were all in and around connection with other people, connection with people from our past, past families, past partners, things like that. Um, but even some questions looking at thinking about the future. Someone was asking about are they actually future faking themselves? I thought that was an interesting question. I think again, I can tie the need for connection in with that when we think about the future, how we would like the future to look. Um, Even thinking about someone had asked a question about, once the scapegoat leaves, what do they do? How do they manage conflict and so on? So I was thinking there was a lot in and around connection. Um, But the first question that came up was someone was asking about, let me see, was about when other people seem to make zero effort. You're like having to do all the work, whether that's arranging days out, nights out, things like that, arranging social gatherings and so on. There is still something in there, I think, about connection. Now, this is the thing about narcissistic environments and relationships and so on. As much as this would apply to traumatic events, situations, this would apply to addiction, things like that. Trauma disconnects us. Okay, it disconnects us. We can find it difficult to mix with others, to trust, to relax. Sometimes we will withdraw, we isolate, things like that. We keep a lot of things to ourselves. We ruminate, we analyze, and so on. And as I often say, the antidote to toxic people are actually decent people, healthy people. But what trauma can do, as I say, it disconnects us. We can isolate ourselves. Sometimes, as I said, we just withdraw. And sometimes we do need a bit of space. We need to gather our thoughts. Someone had mentioned about planning the future, thinking about the future. Yeah, we need to think about maybe what direction we need to take. So we do need a bit of space on our own. I always say there's nothing wrong with a duvet day once in a while, okay? We all need to lie on the sofa, watch The Empire Strikes Back, eat a bucket of KFC or something, whatever it is we do. Maybe I'm giving away too much information because that would be my duvet day. We all need that from time to time just to rest, to recharge, to gather our thoughts, maybe be creative, whatever. As a default, it's not so healthy whenever we do just keep on withdrawing. We turn down invitations to things. We don't necessarily put ourselves out there to meet new people and so on. What often happens is the more we isolate ourselves, that can bring up a lot of things. It can bring up things like loneliness and so on. We can fear we have to face things alone. We have to do things alone. Um, if things like trauma and distress disconnect us, then the opposite is also true. Connection can help us heal, but it's the thing. The thing is, it's about the connection. As someone mentioned, they might be putting in all the work, they might be making all the effort. Now, on one hand, that's not necessarily so good because you would like to think that other people are going to ask you, do you want to do things? Do you want to go places? What I would say is, even if you're the one having to do the work, remember there is something in it for you. You are getting something out of it, even if it's just in the short term. Now, it sounds like you're just using people. Not, I don't mean it to come across this way. You're doing what you need to do to have some kind of connection until you're able to maybe build up connection with other people as well. There is still some kind of contact, some kind of social aspect to things. And it might be worth remembering as well that sometimes we find ourselves going into roles. We go into roles very easily. Sometimes you're in a group of friends, you'll have the one person who always organizes something, you'll have the one person who's the problem solver, if you will. You have one person who's the clown, is always joking and so on. So we can find ourselves going into different roles. Sometimes we go into roles very easily. But if we're the one that's always doing the work, it feels like, if we didn't bother, no one would bother. And that could well be the case. But even in that short term, you are still getting something from the interaction. It is worth paying attention to that. That there is something there. And as I say, it could just be until, I wouldn't say something better comes along. That sounds, it doesn't sound right. It could just be until maybe you're building connections with other people, until your social group is widening, and you might find yourself being included a lot more in some of those new interactions and those new relationships. Someone had mentioned as well about induced conversations. Again, when it comes to connection, we need some kind of interaction with people. We need to be stimulated in different ways, emotionally, intellectually, physically, things like that. We need to be stimulated in different ways. Now, the thing about conversations are most of them are induced, in the sense that you might be, I don't know, in a waiting room somewhere, doctor's waiting room or something like that. And either you or someone else in the room just mentions the weather or how awful it is you have to wait so long. That, if you will, it's a bit of a comment, but it's also a conversation is being induced, if you know what I mean. In terms of like narcissistic people, when it comes to induced conversations, what you normally find is there is some kind of intent. Okay, it's like they want some specific information, or they want to get you to say a certain thing, or whatever it is. They're looking for something. So there is some kind of agenda behind the conversation. That's different from someone just, as I say, mentioning the weather, or that's a nice hat you're wearing or something, whatever. Most conversations are induced to some degree. And it is something that only really comes with discernment, especially if you have to really get to know someone and see repeated patterns of behavior, to be able to recognize the nature behind the conversations. What is, if any, is there an agenda behind the conversation? I think as well, what you might find, just thinking about that induced conversation, sometimes you might know someone, they wouldn't give you the time of day. They just look right through you. You talk to them and they don't even answer. It's like you're not there. But every now and again, they will talk to you. They will include you. Now, that could be because other people are present and they don't want to look like knobs or whatever word you want to use. So there is some kind of hidden agenda there. But other than that, when it comes to induced conversations, it's worth bearing in mind that most are induced. And yeah, there may be an agenda behind some of them, not necessarily a sinister agenda, but it's the people that may be inducing the conversations. It's worth paying attention to the type of people whose company you're in, the type of people who are inducing some kind of conversation. Sticking on the theme of connection, someone had asked, as I said earlier on, about the idea of what happens when the scapegoat leaves. Well, there isn't really a one answer fits all, but I'll tell you what I think. You're still being blamed. Doesn't matter whether you're there or not. They need the source of someone. They need someone to put, to put the blame for the source of all their misery and all their pain and all the rest of it. So sometimes what you might find is whether you're there or not, you're still being blamed. Could be for past things. Could be even things that are happening in the here and now are because of past things. Other times, if you think the role of the scapegoat is, as I say, it's the person that they just dump all their crap onto, who is responsible for all their misery. If you're not there anymore, who's to say that just don't find a new one? Just don't find someone new. They pick someone new. Might not necessarily be a family member. I mean, in a workplace, it could be someone else. They just find someone. 'Cause that's the thing about narcissistic people. They can't really take responsibility for themselves. The fault is always external. So there's always going to have to be something or someone to dump their pain and their misery on, to hold responsible for their own screw ups and things like that. So if you're not there anymore, maybe there's no contact or whatever. We don't know what's going on in people's heads. The most we'll ever do is speculate. If it was a workplace, if it was a family, whatever, it really depends on the nature of the relationship, and the environment. But they might well have forgotten about you and they've just picked a new one. Either that, or as I say, they're still blaming you. But it doesn't matter whether you're there or not. You're still the source of the misery. Question that came up about the thinking about the future. Again, I'd like to tie this in with the connection. If we're thinking about things and we're alone, we're isolated, things like that. The question was about like future faking ourselves. Well, not necessarily. We may be fantasizing, but not necessarily in an unhealthy way. We could be having an idea of how we would like the future to look. I think the thing is, though, if we're thinking about how we would like the future to look, we're not always thinking about how do we get there from here? What is it I need to do? Because some of the things we need to do might actually involve other people, in the sense that we might need practical help and advice and guidance and so on. We might need to be taught new skills, whatever it is. So there is still that need for connection somehow. And also with a sense of connection, if there are people you feel safe and comfortable with, you could be sharing these ideas. Because if they're people you trust, if the people have got your back, well, they might point out flaws in your thinking. They might point out obstacles. But what they might also do is they might encourage you. They might give you a bit of advice. They might point you in the right direction. They might be very supportive. Sometimes it's easier. Sometimes. I'm a therapist. What am I saying? Sometimes it is easier when you don't have to do things alone, when you have someone or some people, as I say, can advise you and guide you, point out things you haven't seen. As I said, it might not be that good idea. There may be consequences you hadn't considered. So thinking about the future is not necessarily a bad thing. It's when we start to ruminate over a particular future, maybe it's a negative one, we don't want it, or we're trying to avoid it. Okay, again, we're catastrophizing, we're assuming the worst is going to happen. So we're trying to avoid things, and we're trying to avoid things that haven't even happened yet. That's not so healthy. Or we could be thinking about the future we have, but we're, how to put this? We're upset, if you will. We're in some kind of distress because either we're not there yet, there are far too many obstacles, it seems too far away in the future. Again, these are the things that can sometimes lead us to withdraw. These are the things that can sometimes stop us from perhaps trying in the first place. Thinking about the future, as I say, can be a healthy thing. But one of the ways to help manage that, as I often say, is to ask yourself, what small thing could you do, either right now or first thing in the morning, that you're going to thank yourself for later, because it'll get you a step closer. Okay. So again, it's not necessarily a bad thing. It's what we're thinking and how we're thinking about it. Where did I get to? There was another question I wanted to talk about. Yeah, someone had mentioned limerence, about having feelings for people. Now, sometimes we do have feelings for people, and as the person asked in their question, they're not always necessarily romantic feelings. We tend to idealize, okay? All of us, to some degree. We will idealize a job. We'll apply for a job. We'll think it's going to be an amazing job. We're going to make new friends. We're going to earn money and things like that. So we have an idealized version of the job. But when we get there, everybody's miserable. They're trailing their knuckles on the floor and they're just watching the clock, waiting until 5 o'clock. It's not a nice place to work. So the real and the ideal very rarely meet. And when that happens, sometimes we can feel a lot of disappointment, we can feel distress, different things like that. We idealize people as well. Like, not just romantically, because we think they're amazing, they're going to complete us and all that sort of thing. Um, we think they're great, we think they're amazing, and then we find out they pick their nose and they snore. They're not as perfect as we thought they were. We can idealize people in work. We can idealize professional people. We could idealize people that we follow on social media. We can idealize movie stars, film stars, managers, whoever it is, people we have respect for. We start to idealize them. We see things in them that we admire. We see things in them that we would like to be like. So we would maybe watch them closely to try and learn from them, try and emulate their behaviors and so on, try to do the things they do as well as they do. That's not necessarily limerence as such. That could be maybe having a role model or something like that, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. When it becomes limerence is when there are feelings for someone, but it's the version of them that we imagine they are. We fall for the idealized version of them, if you will. And as I say, the real and the ideal very rarely meet. That can bring up a lot of grief in us. I talked about limerence, I think it was maybe a month or so ago. It was either in a video or it was in a live stream. I can't remember. You'd think I would know my own channel, wouldn't you? That'll give you a better idea of limerence. But what I would say is, if you're finding you're thinking, feeling certain ways about people, not just a person in particular, but maybe some people, maybe not all at the same time, but maybe it moves from one person to the next as you move throughout your life. Have a look at that person, have a look at those people, and look at the recurring patterns and the recurring themes, because there might be something about them. It could be, who knows, it could be maybe their confidence, it could be their conscientiousness, it could be their humor. Whatever it is about that person, or those people rather, look at the recurring themes in them, because whatever that is, that could be what it is you might feel is lacking, what it is you feel is attractive. They could be some of the qualities you might like to have. Maybe you do have them and perhaps you're shy or something, but it would be worth paying attention to those those different people and look at what the qualities in all of them are, to give you an idea of the recurring themes that are coming up for you. So there were some of the questions that came up. I can't remember them all. I just scribbled down a few of them. Because I was looking, as I say, I was looking at the recurring themes. What came up was the connection. As I said, things like trauma, addiction, distress, things like that disconnect us from other people. The more we isolate and the more we withdraw, albeit in the short term, it's not necessarily a bad thing. As I say, we can catch our breath, recharge, and stuff like that. In the long term, it's not so healthy, because we can find it harder and harder to maybe encourage ourselves to do things. We can get into habits like procrastinating. Procrastinating and avoidance are very similar, but they are different. But they can feel the same. What I mean by that is, when we avoid something, we're avoiding something that we think is going to be uncomfortable, unpleasant, and all the rest of it. When we procrastinate, it feels the same way, but we're not saying no. We're just saying, not at the moment, not right now. We will find something else to do instead. Maybe we'll just say, I'm not in the mood. Maybe we'll say, I haven't the energy, I haven't the motivation. We keep putting things off, and we'll put them off over and over again. We just keep on putting them off until we're actually getting nothing done. And then we're feeling really bad. And then we're withdrawing even more. We're isolating ourselves even more. It's a very, very easy habit to fall into. And what you might find is, maybe people stop asking you to go for a coffee or to call around or whatever, because we keep saying no. We keep coming up with an excuse. And a lot of time it's, as I say, we're lacking motivation, we're lacking energy. This is the thing. There is no magic bullet to something like procrastination. Sometimes you just have to do it. Like, even if you just make whatever it is you've been putting off, you just make a small start, you just do it. You pay attention to what it is you're really trying to avoid. You could be trying to avoid the fear of failing, the fear of it not going well. You could be avoiding the consequences. It's going to require some kind of sacrifice. It's going to require time and effort. It's going to bring up envy or ridicule or scorn in other people, where those are often the things we're really trying to avoid. Sometimes we just have to do the damn thing, or at least make a start. And as Ruth Ann Harper, a friend of mine on YouTube, as she said, the motivation comes afterwards. Let me give you an example. You keep getting asked out for a coffee, you keep turning it down. And after a while, you stop getting asked. Then you start to feel worse. But imagine, whether you're in the mood or not, you're asked out for a coffee, so you say you'll go. And even if it's raining outside, even if it's cold, whatever, you still make the effort. You put your coat on and off you go, and you have your coffee. Now you pay attention. How hard was that really to do? Score yourself. Put yourself on a scale if you have to give yourself an idea, to be able to read it back to yourself. But even if you go for the coffee, do you know what? You don't have to have had the best time in the world. But pay attention, because more often than not, you don't feel worse. You don't feel any worse. Sometimes you might actually feel better. But the worst case scenario is you don't feel any worse for going out. They're the things that you build on. If you do benefit from it, if you are enjoying it, that's your motivation. You remember that for the next time. You try to keep that energy. That's what you're looking for the next time. So sometimes it really does require us to just do something to encourage ourselves. Okay. But when it comes to building healthy connections, it could be you take up the invite to go out for a coffee. It could be something like that. You take up those invites. It could mean you reaching out to people. It could be reaching out to people maybe you haven't seen for a few years, people you were friendly with, you'd like to get back into contact with, because you might have been in a situation or an environment where you found yourself being isolated. You know, whoever you were with didn't approve of you having any friends or any kind of contact. You might have found yourself constantly being accused of cheating or caring too much about other people or whatever. So over a period of time, you saw people less and less. You withdrew. And that can be very hard. Sometimes we feel a bit embarrassed to try to get in contact with someone we haven't seen for a year, 2 years, 5 years, maybe even 10. Sometimes we'll have to make that effort. We reach out to them. Even just, as I said earlier on about an induced conversation, even just to induce a conversation. And that could be something as simple as, how's things? Haven't seen you in a while. You know, what are you up to these days? Things like, whatever it is, it's trying to regain some kind of contact. And what you often find is, if it was people that cared about you, they'll be glad to hear from you. Okay, even if they've moved on, moved away, did whatever, might still be glad to hear from you. They might appreciate hearing from you. When it comes to maybe forming new connections, that could mean maybe engaging in something new. That could be taking part in a social group, joining a club of some kind, a book club, a hiking club, whatever it is. It could involve something like that, and just introducing yourself with a hello. We don't have to go overboard. We don't have to go in, singing songs, telling stories, things like that. Just little small things. Get to know people a little piece at a time, and let them get to know you. Be genuinely curious about them. Ask them questions. Ask them about their experiences. Their thoughts on something. And when they're talking to you, really listen to them. Pay attention to them. Don't just jump in with your story. Certainly tell them your story if you want, but don't necessarily jump in. Ask them. Be genuinely curious. You want to learn about them. You want to get to know them. And if you're exchanging numbers or something, every now and again, just share a text, whatever, just to keep that communication going, that connection going. And it could just be, you go in again on Monday night, Enjoyed it last week. Looking forward to seeing you again. Whatever it is, I don't need to tell you what to say. You're all adults. You know how to talk to people. Um, just little ways to keep that communication going, checking in with each other. If it's something like a support group or whatever, and if it's one of those support groups where people do share numbers, I know that not everywhere does. Depends on the type of group, how it's being facilitated, and so on. Online world, you need to be very cautious who you share information with. But sharing humor, sharing jokes, letting people get to know your little quirks, let them get to know you as well. Whenever you do things like that, what you might find is humor can become a lot easier as well. And sometimes we do actually get to know each other through humor. I think humor is great in the sense that it can. Everybody laughs at something. We all laugh at different things, but everybody laughs. What laughter does is it lightens the mood a lot of the time. We have to be appropriate with our jokes, of course. We're hoping other people are going to be appropriate as well. But the laughing at silly things, ridiculous things, can really lighten the mood. People relax a lot more whenever we share little funny bits of information, little funny stories, and things like that. So that can help with building connection. But another thing is we can build connection through common interests, shared activities, things like that. I mentioned earlier on, something like a book club or something. Not everybody might be reading the same book or the same kind of books, but everybody reads, and they can share with each other the kind of books they read, what they're about. They might swap books, they might talk about the stories, they might talk about other stories that author has written, things like that. Might share their insights on different characters and so on, like that. Finding common ground. If it was like a sport or something, well, there's going to be common ground there as well, because you're all playing on the same team. If you're playing against an opposing team, this is the thing, even with an opposing team, you're all doing the same thing, you're all playing the same sport, so there is connection there. There's companionship and things like that, even where there is competition. Those shared activities can be useful. Something else that can help build this just come to my head is, don't shy away from being reliable. And what I mean by that is, what we don't necessarily have to do is, we don't have to volunteer to do everything. We're trying to help everybody out. We don't want to, go into the realms of people pleasing, finding it hard to say no. But if we agree to be somewhere, then we turn up. If we agree to do something, then we do it. If we agree to help out, then we help out. When people can see that you are reliable, you are dependable, even though you can still say no from time to time, they'll respect your no. But when people see that you are reliable, yeah, you might find that helps build connection as well. Especially if you start to see that they're reliable too. If they just leave you to do everything, then, maybe not so much. If you are maybe joining a group, a club or whatever, and if you're finding it difficult to mix, remember that other people in the group might find it difficult as well. Okay. Again, there is something in that. We don't have to go through this alone. We don't have to struggle alone. Sometimes you're worried about what people are thinking of us, how they're going to react to us, what are they saying about us when we're not around. We'll worry about that, but what we forget is other people might be worrying the same thing. So if you're looking for a bit of space, remember other people might want a bit of space as well. They might need space to themselves. They don't particularly want to be smothered. They don't particularly want to be judged either, any more than you do. So there are just some ideas to help build with connection. There are many other things you could be doing, I guess. The online world, I think, is good in the sense that it opens up a whole world to us. But again, it is something you need to be very, very cautious and very careful about. You don't want to be giving your private information or details to complete strangers online. Say you're all adults, I'm assuming. Um, you just always err on the side of caution, is what I would say. Real life, maybe that's different. Maybe we get to know people, we see their face, we get to know them personally rather through than just text or whatever chat and stuff like that. Um, and operate within boundaries. Remember your boundaries. What's mine and what's yours, your values, your integrity, your limits, things like that. But certainly respect other people's as well. Going back to what I was saying a moment ago about, you know, give people space to be themselves. Hopefully they'll do the same with you. So, kind of whizzed through that. I kind of felt like I went through that on one breath. I hope I answered questions that came up. I hope all of them were answered. As I say, I thought the recurring theme was all about connection. But then I'm not a mind reader, so let's have a look. I'm going to have a look at the chats and I'm going to answer the questions as they come up. So let's go back to the very beginning. And what have we got? Okay. Here we go. Okay, I had to listen to self-pity and selfishness when it came to other people's problems. That's from Kafa. Some people can be consumed by their own pain that they can't necessarily see beyond that. I can't see other people as well. Now, whether that's narcissism or not, it certainly can be. What helps with connection, as I said, is listening to people, but that person needs to listen as well. We listen to each other. Okay. Relationships, friendships, things like that are ideally reciprocal. Okay. Carol says narcissism is our new normal. There is something in that. There has been a huge increase in narcissistic traits and qualities. Over the decades, you can see it, but particularly, I think, since the arrival of social media, I think a lot of it has been heightened. And I think a lot of platforms, a lot of social media sites, pages, platforms. Again, I'm looking for a word. Platform was the word. A lot of those are strange in the sense that they seem to, I wouldn't say promote or encourage it, but it does seem to be rife. Maybe it does promote and encourage it. How outrageous can you be? How demanding can you be? How outraged can you be? The the um, the algorithms, I think, tend to push a lot of things that bring up outrage and envy and so on like that. And I think people are learning they do get a lot of traction from behaving in a certain way. Um, is it the new normal? Currently, they're saying it's something like 1 in 6 people is narcissistic. And everybody's looking at the one. I think we need to look at the other 5. How many of those 5 that aren't narcissistic are enabling, are codependent, are withdrawn, anything for a quiet life? I think the 1 in 6, it is quite a high number if you think of 1 in 6, but it's the other 5. What's going on there is the question I'd be wondering. But that's just me. I always try to look at things the opposite way around because sometimes I think they make a little bit more sense. Where did we get to? Here's a girly, and this is from a conversation it looks like you're having with someone else. There are so many around. How can we heal if they are everywhere? It is hard to heal in an environment that has been hurting you. That much is true. Doesn't mean we cannot heal because someone else could behave narcissistically. Again, this is what I meant by the other 5 out of the 1 in 6, the other 5 people. Just being authentic. We can certainly we can be polite and courteous to people. We don't necessarily need to shut people down and expel them from our lives and all that sort of thing. We can be courteous. We can be pleasant. We can be decent. We can be authentic, and we can be boundaried. People often say that narcissists seek out empaths and so on, and that's true to a degree, but it's not like they have superpowers. It's not like they can smell empathy like a shark can smell blood from a mile away. Not necessarily. um, what narcissistic people look for are people who will allow them to behave the way they do. Generally, that normally is kind, empathic, compassionate people, but they will do it with anybody, anyone they can get away with it with. You can be empathic, you can be very caring, you can be very compassionate, you can be all of those things, but you can still have assertiveness, you can still have your boundaries, you can still have your integrity. So even when the people around you, or some people around you, are behaving the way they do, it's almost like we can observe them, we don't absorb. We can see it for what it is. We don't engage. um, as I say, we can still be polite and courteous, but what we don't do is we don't play their games, okay? And we can still do that while being caring and nice. It's quite a trick, but it's not difficult. It's not that hard. It's not as hard as you might think. There is a concept that I've been reading about recently called the Sigma empath. And I think that's a curious term. It's not really a psychological term, but it does just refer to someone who is kind and compassionate, but they are still, strong in their character. They are still boundaried and so on. So, where do we get to? B says people don't understand that things do end up lining up and the truth will hit them in the face. Whether they accept it or not, it will be out. Well, this is true. Um, Feelings seem to live in a world now where everything is being driven by feelings. I would say our feelings are very important. Of course, they are, because our feelings, a lot of them, drive our impulses, our decision making, things like that. If we don't understand what it is we feel, if we just say it's anxiety, if we just say it's anger, if we just say it's stress or whatever, if we don't fully understand what we feel, look at what fuels it, why we're feeling a certain way, then what we can end up doing is emotional reasoning. We'll just tell ourselves whatever it is, it's true because I feel it. That's often what you find if you're with a narcissistic person. It's true because they feel it. Okay. It's like a emotional dysregulation. It's emotional reasoning. So we could feel something very, very strongly, and we'll tell ourselves it's true. But the thing about our feelings, whenever we learn to regulate them and understand them and allow them to inform us, not necessarily make the decisions for us, but inform us, um, it becomes quite different. We can problem solve. We're not thinking of avoidance or escaping or whatever, getting out of the avoiding the terrible situation. Um, we can learn, especially if we're dealing with other people who are being very hyper emotional and they're using emotive language and insults and things like that to try to control us. Well, we can recognize that as important as feelings are, they're not always an accurate reflection of reality. So I often say as well, when I like to add on to that, they're not always an accurate reflection of reality, but we'll have to remember that reality does not have a vested interest in how you feel about it. Again, whenever we recognize things like that, other people could be behaving the way they do, even using emotive language and threats and things like that. But with our healthy boundaries, we're not necessarily going to take that on board. We can empathize, but as I often say, it's a difference between caring about and caring for. So, where do we go? May says a conversation feels like they're always trolling for an audience, an eye on you and any potential audience they can find. Yes, that you have nailed it. Absolutely. This, no one understands fully. This is something that doesn't really get looked at when people are talking about narcissism. Narcissism is largely, albeit it's a huge maladaptive coping mechanism, all encapsulated in the word narcissism. Narcissism is, how will I put this? It is hard work. It is a curse. I believe it is a curse in the sense that that person is, imagine you go for a coffee, you're sitting at your table, you're drinking your coffee, they're drinking theirs, and you're having your conversation. When they're talking to you, they're they're looking at you, and as they're talking, they're thinking, how do I look right now? How am I coming across? Do I sound reasonable? Do I sound intelligent? Do I sound witty, attractive, whatever it is? But what we don't realize is, as they're doing that with us, they're doing it with everybody in the room. That person over there who's just ordered a latte, how did I look when they glanced over here? You know, that person over there munching on a donut, you know, how did what I've just said, how did that sound to them? So it's a curse. Their mind is going all over the place. It's always about how they look, how they sound, how they coming across, and things like that. And that is such hard work. It really is. It must be a nightmare. We are all self-conscious to some degree, but this is much more than self-conscious. Um, how someone could stay in the moment and hold down a conversation while they're thinking about everybody in the room at the same time is wow, it's incredible. The other the other thing I would say is, and this is something I'll be talking about in tomorrow's video, if I get it done. I hope I get it done. Because I'm running behind schedule. Um, I'm going to be talking about when narcissistic people promise they're going to change. Why would they say that? How do they say that? And, you know, what's the motivations behind it? One of the things I'm going to mention is, like, if you have an argument with them, especially if it's a relationship and you have an argument with them, sometimes you get a narcissistic person, and they don't just send you a text saying, sorry about that, I won't do it again. What they do is they put it out there on social media for everyone to see. You know, oh, I've hurt you. I don't know how I can possibly live with myself. I feel so ashamed of myself. I hurt the only person who ever truly, etc., etc. Do you know what? There could be a lot of different reasons for that, but I do believe the main reason is that's not for you. That's for their audience. Okay, so there is something in that. There is something in that, one eye on you and one eye on the rest of the world. Absolutely. So where do we get to? Where do you get to? Looking for something with it. If you can put a question mark on something, that would make it so much easier for me to spot. Okay. Daria Peppo says, true, we tend to idealize many things and not just people. You're right, we do. We idealize. We have sometimes we have a version of something in our head, how we imagine something's going to look, how it's going to come across. I'll give you an example. When I was a lot younger, I knew a girl who she was like myself. She was a student, and she had this ambition. She wanted to be a journalist. She wanted to work in journalism, and you know, she wanted to cover these important stories, and she wanted to interview really interesting people, and you know, and fair play to her, she worked really, really hard. She did a lot of voluntary work, anything at all, just to get her foot in the door. And you know, she eventually she got her job as, I suppose we call a trainee journalist. I don't know if they still call them that, but a trainee anyway back then. And she lasted 2 years. 2 years, then left it and went into teaching instead. Um, the real version of the job was not how she imagined. She thought she was going to be I don't know, Lois Lane or something. She was going to be this investigative reporter and she was going to be doing this, that, and the other. And what she found was she was constantly under pressure because of the deadlines. If you think of like a radio station or a TV station, you've got news bulletins 3, 4, 5 times a day, whatever. So always, always tight deadlines. Um, Sometimes you would have worked a long time on a story only to have it pulled at the last moment because something else has come up which is bigger, or whatever it is you're reporting on, you're suddenly not allowed to report on. There might be a court case or something. There's a lot of different things going on. And what she also said was, it's very, very cutthroat. Um, you really need a neck of brass. She said that she found herself one day parked outside someone's house with a load of other journalists. Something terrible had happened to one of the family members, and they're all camped outside the house just waiting to see someone to try and get a few words from them. And if you think the family's probably heartbroken. She also said that some of the journalists aren't that nice as well. She said some of them would climb over your bleeding corpse to take your story off you. So it wasn't what she expected. Her idealized, romanticized version of this industry wasn't what she thought it was. She said she just wasn't cut out for it. And as I say, she went into teaching. She still is a teacher today, by the way. So yeah, we have idealized version, not just of people, but of things themselves. And the real and the ideal very rarely meet. Where we struggle sometimes is with that disconnect between the real and the ideal. Sometimes we can accept it. We now have new information. It's not what I thought it was, or you're not what I thought you were, whatever. And we can rationalize that. But other times we can really, really struggle with that. So where do we get to? Carl says she's always looking for a safe person. I think we're all looking for safe people. Sometimes we'll have to define safe. Yeah, sometimes you will meet sneaky people, manipulative people. Sometimes you'll meet stupid people. Sometimes you'll meet wicked people. Sometimes you'll just meet people that come and go in your life. Um, Sometimes you'll meet people that are just not that dependable, but there's not necessarily any malice in them. All of us are looking for safe people to some degree. We can have safety. It depends on the kind of relationship we have. You could have maybe a professional relationship with someone in work, so that could be quite safe. It's a professional relationship, um, but we're not necessarily best friends. We don't, share private, secret information. So it's when we're looking for safe people, it's maybe being able to define what we mean by safe, but also the kind of relationship we're planning to have, we would like to have. Okay, where do we get to? Hello, Laura, coming in from Canada, joining late today. Well, it's nice to have you later than never. Lena's asking, do we need to focus on how to build mode energy? I'm not quite sure what you mean by mode energy. I do know what the word mode is, and I do know what energy is, but I'm not quite sure what you mean by mode energy. To focus on how to build energy, think about what I was saying earlier about how, as Ruth Ann Harper says, the motivation comes afterwards. The energy might come afterwards. What we sometimes need beforehand is more encouragement. We might need to encourage ourselves. We can find different ways of doing that. Even if something, as I say, something doesn't have to be brilliant, it doesn't have to go swimmingly, it doesn't have to be marvelous, but we pay attention to it. It wasn't as bad as we thought. We don't feel any worse for it. And maybe it did get us out of the house or whatever. We can pay attention to those things. We also need to pay attention if we don't do those things. If we don't go out and mix, if we don't try something for ourselves, if we don't dust down our CV, update it, whatever, if we don't do whatever it is that's in our best interest, how things tend to get worse. We need to pay attention on both sides. Beware the person that tells you they're an empath. Empaths don't need to tell, their actions speak for themselves. Narcs say they're empaths to draw you in. There is something in that. Now, some people will say they're empathic or they're empathetic, or some people will identify themselves as an empath. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. Um, Again, pay attention to the behavior, as you say, you're right. Pay attention to the behavior because the actions speak for themselves. There is something that's, again, it's not something that's often talked about. And this would be very common with covert narcissism. Covert narcissistic people tend to believe they are good. They're good people. They're wonderful people. A lot of the time they feel misunderstood, unappreciated, things like that. Hence the narcissism comes out, the toxicity, the low mood, the guilt tripping, the shaming. But just because they're treating this person bad, they think it doesn't really matter because, again, a lack of empathy, it doesn't really matter because they're far too concerned with this very important project over here. They're feeding little homeless penguins and they're giving little baby kittens balls of wool to play with, and they're getting their picture taken, presenting a check to some charity or whatever, and they're always picking up litter and they're doing so they believe that they're good people because they're doing good things. Meanwhile, those closest to them are living in bloody misery, and they just don't get it. So there is something in that about paying attention to the behavior. Um, you're right; the actions do speak louder than words. The other thing I would say is people might describe themselves as an empath, but that's maybe as far as they go. They don't keep laboring the point. They don't come up to people and shake hands and say, "Hello, I'm Darren. I'm an empath, by the way." No, they generally don't do that. Empathic people generally don't go around broadcasting it. Um, they might state it, they might say it maybe once, they might say it in a conversation, they might, whatever. But again, they don't necessarily wear it like it's a badge of honor. Okay, where did we get to? Oh, Kafaka says again, they induce conversations and talk about themselves. That's why I said pay attention to the agenda. There's usually a hidden agenda. Tim says people always judge me because I look younger than I am, and it sticks in them even when they know I'm older. Well, that sounds, Tim, like that's envy. You're bringing out envy in some people. I look younger than I am too. I'm 112 years old. Look at me. Don't look a day over 30. Let me see. Oh, it's jumped all over the place. Let's get back to the beginning. Laura's asking, has anyone dealt with a covert narcissist who creates codependency with enablers? You're the only person who can help me. I think it'd be hard pushed to find someone who hasn't. Laura, I don't mean to be mean by that, but it's one of the things that covert narcissistic people do. They draw on other people's sympathy, compassion, empathy, their good nature, and things like that. There is putting that responsibility, I suppose would be a way of putting it, a responsibility on others. You're the only person who can help me. You're the only person who can do this. If it wasn't for you, but then you do whatever it is they're doing, and it's like they never seem to change. They never seem to get any better. There's always going to be something else that's going to come up. Um, it's not a nice expression, but what I heard one time was it's almost like they walk around with their umbilical cord just looking for someone to plug it into, to live off, to drain. Okay, they just feed off their energy and so on. So sometimes that will happen. It's not uncommon with something like covert narcissism. That being said, again, you have to, that's assuming it is a narcissistic person. Sometimes that person may have idealized you. Okay, so it's not necessarily narcissism, it's they have idealized you. There might be something in you that they're finding really nice, could be attractive, it could be strong, it could be whatever qualities. They're doubting their own abilities because maybe you have done or said something that encouraged them, gave them a little bit of motivation or whatever, and they have now just idealized you. So there can be that as well. It is worth discerning. Okay, now where did we get to? Lady Campion. Lady Campion, I was listening to you the other night. Every now and again I go onto your channel and I just play a few songs one after another. It's nice. Sometimes I do it when I'm doing the ironing. If anyone hasn't been on Lady Campion's channel and heard her sing, do yourself a massive favor, because she's got a fantastic voice, absolutely wonderful voice. So there's a plug for your channel. Falconer asks, is there such a thing as a covert malignant narcissist? Yes, of course there is. Narcissism is narcissism. It just manifests in different ways. Sometimes there's like a default setting, but it's a spectrum, it's a scale, and the person isn't stuck in the one place. So a malignant narcissist can be malignant. Yeah, of course they can. Laura's laughing at my penguins. Yeah. Where do we get to? Where do we get to? S. Thomas says vampires is like a good way to think about them. Have been described as energy vampires, emotional vampires. There are those that just feed off other people's emotion, whether it's good or bad, as long as they bring something up. Oh, Carl says we're the leftover food in Freud's bowl. Oh, do you know what? I didn't mean that to sound the way it did last week when I said that, but it is true. That's how they see people. Their friends, their partners, their families. You're a given. You're there. You're always going to be there. They'll always come back to you, and they'll get whatever it is they need. But if they can get a bonus somewhere else, then that's where they'll go. One of the things I'm going to be looking at in that video about whenever they promise they'll change is actually that going everywhere else for validation, attention, and things like that. And when you've had enough, when you're done with it, they go back and the bowl's empty. The bowl's not even there. It's just been removed. They're not. The desperation that can bring up, which is why they might promise to change. Whether or not they do, it's a different question, and I will be going into that. Laura now has a ludicrous image of a zombie staggering around looking for an umbilical cord outlet. What, you know what? My mind goes all over the place, and I have the strangest analogies and the strangest images in my head. So I do apologize for polluting you all with my crazy thinking. But yeah. Lady Campion saying, I feel like empathy used to be something that was what all of us were supposed to aim for, but easier for certain people or in certain situations. We have different degrees of empathy. We have different kinds of empathy. When you talk about narcissism and a lack of empathy, that doesn't mean no empathy. Doesn't mean no empathy. There can be a cognitive empathy. There can also be an empathy for someone in particular or something in particular, like let's imagine, say, Freud or something. You know, if I was a narcissistic person, I might not really care about people. I just, see what I can get from people, how I can use them, and what they think of me, and I All of you are watching me this evening, and I'm just feeding off what I imagine is your adulation, because you think I'm wonderful and I have all the answers and so on, and I'm going to be so very clever. I'm loving that. If anything happened to Freud, I would be very upset. If anything happened to be a friend of mine or someone I care about, a partner, a family member, that might annoy me. It might upset me. I might be looking at that as more of an inconvenience because I'm not going to get their attention or whatever. So I might log back on here and start telling you all about how terrible things are for me. I'm so worried and all the rest of it. But if something were to happen to Freud, he's ill, he gets injured, whatever it is, I would get very hurt and very upset and very distressed. So there can still be an empathy for a person for things that will come in different degrees. The difference with someone like Freud's my dog. Difference with Freud is Freud's my dog, he's my pet, if you will. The love, the companionship is unconditional. I don't have to do anything in particular to get it off him. It's always there. That would be the difference, I guess. Also, he's very special to me. He's I'm out walking and you always get a chat with someone else who's walking a dog, so there's a lot of different things go on there. So it's not no empathy. It is a lack of empathy, but it's not no empathy. It can come and go. I suppose the best way to describe it is it's like an inconsistent empathy, which is why some people could be very confused where someone is upsetting them, someone's maybe bullying them, and the narcissistic person in their life doesn't give a damn. It's not even on their radar. They don't even care that this person is being mistreated. But then someone else bothers them. Someone else might do or say something, and that narcissistic person is in there, like Rambo, like James Bond, like a Marvel superhero, ready to defend them and back them up and stand beside them and all the rest of it. It's inconsistent, and it doesn't make sense why that would be that way, why they would behave like that. That's something I might actually talk about in the video, the inconsistency. Children often find this in narcissistic families where they could be being mistreated, maybe bullied at school, and the parent doesn't really care. But then something else happens, like someone out in the street picks a fight with them, or one of the neighbors says something to them. And again, parents out there are defending them. Child's learning very mixed signals here. I think that might be something worth exploring, actually. Thank you for bringing that up. Let me see, where do we get to? Laura's asking again what inspired me to focus on topics related to narcissism. The audience, when I started my channel, I was going to talk about anything mental health related, personalities, relationships, things like that. Pardon me. But what I did at the beginning, through the advice of starting out a channel, they said do things to engage with your audience. And I thought the best thing I could do is just ask the audience for topics they wanted me to cover. And most of the topics people want me to cover are about narcissism. What I don't mind talking about narcissism. What I don't like is just focusing purely on narcissism, which is why on the live streams and more recently in some of the videos, I've been looking more at the people who are affected by narcissism. Ways to become unstuck, ways to move forward, what certain things might be coming up in you, how to manage stress, anxiety, how to motivate yourself, encourage yourself, different things like that. Each to their own. They're doing very well. They've certainly got bigger channels than me, a lot more viewers than me, a lot more subscribers than me, but there are a lot of channels that purely focus on the narcissistic person, and why they eat toast and why they have eyebrows, and what they do with their toenails and stuff. There's a lot of stuff out there, and it's all about the narcissist. And Again, it's good to be informed. I don't have a problem with that. But unless you're actually paying attention to yourself, it can be very hard to move on. Um, so that's why in the live streams, more so than the other stuff, I tend to talk about things that might help you rather than focusing purely on the narcissistic person in your life. But other than that, I would talk about anything. I mean, I've talked about, let me see, what have I talked about in my channel? I've talked about oppositional defiance. I've talked about the different personality disorders. I went through all of them. I've talked about hoarding disorder. I've talked about obsessive compulsive disorder. I've talked about pure OCD. Talked about a lot of different things, really. But yeah, a lot of people are very interested in the narcissism, and I think there is something to be said for maybe going back to what we were talking about earlier, how it seems to be on the rise. I think it's a rise in behaviors and traits and so on. I'm not so sure it's personality disorder. I could be wrong. I haven't fully went through all of the research that's saying this yet. But I think it's a huge rise, and the behaviors are becoming normalized, if you will. Mama Boom Bam says, Darren nailed it. Unconditional love versus conditional love. Mama, you don't mind if I call you Mama. You have just put that a lot more succinctly than I did. You're right. It's conditional versus unconditional love. Where do we get to? Ellie says, narcs have performative empathy. Yep, that's a good way of putting it as well. It's performative empathy. It's to be seen. Yeah, absolutely. It's to get them what they want, good people do good things. So what would be a good thing? The difficulty is without insight, without a bit of self-reflection, it can be very difficult to recognize the difference between a good thing and the right thing. Okay. I think that's where performative empathy falls flat, not recognizing the difference between a good thing and the right thing. Let me see where to get to, coming towards the end because I'm after 9 o'clock. So, okay. Let's see. Elegant says, yeah, there is so much to explore besides narcissistic behaviors. Yeah, not just the narcissistic behaviors. I think it is interesting to understand how and why narcissistic people tick, why they behave the way they do. To be forewarned is to be forearmed, if you know what I mean. It's also important to know the impact of that behavior on us and why we sometimes react the way we do, why we sometimes behave the way we do. For instance, why do we keep on giving chances? Do you ever notice? Someone asks for another chance, you realize, what's the expression? Give me a clean slate. Really, I've given you more slate. I've given you enough slates you could tile a roof with it. Why do we keep doing that? So again, it's important to focus on us as well. Just Mag says, real connection is the antidote to narc grandiosity and indifference. Yeah, real connection, true connection. I'm going to keep saying this. I will keep saying this over and over again. The antidote to toxic people are decent people. Real connection, not superficial connection. Superficial connection is not bad. You can have that with people who listen to the same music as you, or support the same football team, or work in the same building. We can have surface level connections, but true, real connection. Oh, Ella asks, what is pure OCD? It's obsessive compulsive disorder. Someone gets an obsession, an uncomfortable thought in their head. The compulsion is they have to do something to try to get rid of whatever the bad thing they're thinking of. Puro is it's constantly ruminating, analyzing, obsessively thinking. There aren't the focus isn't really on the compulsions, the actions that people do to try and escape the uncomfortable feeling. It's more the thought. It's one thought after another about things being bad, difficult, painful, some disasters going to happen. If you go back, way back, it might be, I think, maybe only the fifth, maybe the sixth video I ever made. I did a brief video. It's only about 5 minutes long about Puro, if you want to have a look at it. Okay, where do we get to? Let me see. Coming up to the end, I'm going to take one more question or one more comment, and I'm off to let Freud out before, I'm sure his bladder's bursting at the moment. B says things are complicated when co-parenting with someone who doesn't want peace. That's right, they are. It can be hard to reason with someone who has set out to be unreasonable, to come to an agreement with someone who is inherently disagreeable. That can be difficult. That's when you might need practical help, advice, and guidance. Just off the top of my head, someone you might want to check out would be my friend, Sarah Davison. She's known online as the divorce coach. And that's one of the things that she covers in her information. She also has like an online course and community kind of thing going on as well. You'll find the information on her website, but she has a channel and a podcast as well on YouTube. You'll find her information there. Someone like her or the people that work with her might be able to provide useful help and advice and guidance for that sort of thing. It's something that would come up a lot with the people that she would work with. So go, where do we get to now? Where did the chat go? Okay, everyone, I think I've come to Carol Ming says Dr. Romani. I think she had, yeah, she's got stuff on her channel. She, I think, does a course, an online course as well. I'm not sure. I think she does. Maybe worth having a look anyway. Okay, everyone, come to the end, or I could be here all night chatting away with you, waffling on my own wee way. I hope you found this evening to be helpful. The importance of connection. Remember, we are social creatures. Even the most introverted of us, we are social creatures. I often say looking at things the opposite way around, they can make a bit more sense. All of us have this need to feel accepted, to be a part of something, to belong to something. Sometimes it's not necessarily the fear or the need to be accepted, but it is the fear of being rejected. And these are the things that sometimes hold us back. The fear of us maybe starting to do new things, trying new things, trying to meet new people, things like that. It can be the fear of being rejected. If you're in a long-term situation or environment with someone who constantly undermined your self-confidence and your self-esteem, made you very self-conscious about the things you said, the way you spoke, how you looked, and things like that, in a long-term environment, that can have like a brainwashing effect on you. And it is going to affect our sense of self afterwards. It can be one of the things that stops us from trying to connect with others. Again, quote my friend Jay Reid, what we need to do is to start living in defiance. We live in defiance against those super ego injunctions that are usually in the narcissistic person's voice, not ours. Even though it might be disguised as ours, might sound like ours, it's usually theirs or someone else's. We learn to live in defiance, a little step at a time. So, hope you find this helpful. Hopefully, I'll get my video recorded tonight and it will be out tomorrow. Hold me to account if I don't. Call me harsh names. Threaten to beat my bottom. No, don't. That just sounds odd. This video might actually get taken down. Anyway, do something harsh anyway. Call me bad names, poke me with a stick, throw little small stones at me and stuff. If I don't get it out on time, I will try and get it recorded and I get it out. What I'm looking at is when a narcissistic person promises you they will change. Okay, what does that actually mean? Are they serious? Do they mean it just in that moment? Is it just a ploy? Whatever it is, I'm going to be looking at it from a lot of different perspectives. I'm going to be looking at through that whole spectrum from just selfish traits right up to narcissistic personality disorder. So I will see you next week. Again, I will put something out. Again, thank you for your ideas. Thank you for your suggestions. I do hope you find this helpful. And until next week, everybody, look after yourselves. Bye now.